Okay, so we're now day 2 now since the siege of Capitol Hill, and a lot of people, I guess it shouldn't be surprising, still have no idea what happened. They don't understand what's going on. They couldn't see this coming, and they of course are drawing all the wrong conclusions. The general consensus on the I guess politically correct, and I mean that in a more traditional sense, mainstream of America. This includes liberals. This includes the, I guess, somewhat socially acceptable left, members of the DSA like AOC. It includes neoconservatives like Adam Kinzinger and Nikki Haley. And even to a certain extent, I think it even includes Trump himself at this point. The interpretation of the events of January the 6th, 2021, they're seen as, I guess, a domestic terrorist attack. They're clear in that sense. They're calling it an insurrection. I believe Joe Biden and many others have used that term, calling it seditious. Lindsey Graham even saying that some of these people are going to be charged with sedition. They think that this was all some plot by an angry mob to try and keep Donald Trump in power, and this has been one of the dumbest common threads of the Trump era, is that the opposition to Trump can only see politics through the lens of Trump, and so to them they can't see anything more. They can't see anything more to this situation than how it pertains to Trump. They don't understand that the reason why these people charge the Capitol is not just because they love Trump. Of course, that's a big part of it. That, I think, is the most visceral and obvious implication of the events of January the 6th. However, if you do some multi-dimensional thinking, or I should say if you go beyond one-dimensional thinking, if you look a little bit past the surface, it becomes clear that this is about much more than Trump. And this should not at all be a hard thing to figure out. The average American who is not totally mired in the day-to-day milieu of just reacting to whatever Trump does understands this. My 87-year-old grandmother, I think I might have gotten her age wrong. Anyway, she's in her 80s. The first thing she said to me when I talked to her today about this situation, she said, "Oh my gosh, it was like the storming of the Bastille. These people are pissed off and they're not going to take it anymore." And she's not a Trump supporter. She can't stand Trump. She thinks he's a jerk, which, I don't think that she's wrong about that. But my point is that she's not someone who's watches CNN every day. In fact, she never watches cable news, which is probably why she's has a much more clear head when it comes to things like this. But other people that I talk to, I think, view this through a very similar lens. It's not just that people love Trump; they hate Congress. Congress's approval rating is in the teens. It's like 14-13%. These people have a grievance, a very specific grievance with a group of people who they do not trust to begin with, who they consider to be a bunch of lying frauds, who they hold responsible for sending their sons and daughters off to die in dumb, pointless wars. And they have had no recourse. They've not even been able to get a hearing, literally, over this election stuff. The whole election fraud controversy is just one item in a long list of grievances that a good chunk of this country has against the central government and against the established order. And just like in the case of the storming of the Bastille, when you constantly when the elite of a country constantly puts their thumb and holds down the ordinary citizen, and just sort of wags their finger in their face, and constantly addresses them with a sense of superiority, when the ordinary person can clearly see that they are not superior to them in a moral sense, it will eventually trigger a violent backlash. And I don't mean necessarily violent in the literal sense, although this was mildly violent. It was not violent in the sense of the BLM stuff, although at the time I very much felt that the BLM riots were a reaction in large part to the lockdowns, although that wasn't what it was directly being tied to. Of course, the media was only talking about the killing of George Floyd, as if George Floyd was the big issue there, or if racism was the big issue. That was just sort of the face of that group's hatred for the system. The BLM rioters hate the same system that these Trump people who were in the Capitol on Wednesday hate, but they just hate it for different reasons and in different ways. They have different grievances. But there's one big difference between, let's call them the MAGA rioters, even though I think that's a bit of a, I think it's a bit hyperbolic to say that at this point, considering there was a handful of them that busted into the Capitol. Most of them just sort of stayed outside and just wanted to wave their flags. And even the ones that went inside, I mean, what, they put their feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. I don't, spare me your outrage, as I vented about yesterday. The difference between these two groups is that the BLM people, that crowd, is constantly being placated and appeased by corporate America and by the political establishment. You have all of the buildings, if you walk in any major city, they've got these big Black Lives Matter banners draped down. You're renaming the street in front of the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza. It's no longer Pennsylvania Avenue. You have a Black Lives Matter Avenue, I think is what it's called in New York City now. But other than that, these are just gestures. You get no concrete changes. The fundamental grievances of the BLM people are not really being addressed, and a lot of them believe that. But your rank and file can be appeased to some extent by these meaningless gestures. When every corporate television commercial is about how Black Lives Matter, that will make a lot of people feel better for a little bit. We see the exact opposite with the Trump people. The Trump people are being constantly antagonized. And I use the term Trump people loosely since now Trump is gone. He's going to be gone. Trump, yesterday said, hey, that's it. Biden's coming in on January 20th. I'm out. The group of people who were latching on to Trump, they are attacked constantly by the political establishment, by the media, and by corporate America. Coca-Cola put out a statement condemning the Trump supporters for going to the Capitol. Was anyone holding their breath, waiting? Oh, gee, what does Coca-Cola have to say about this situation? And thankfully, Coca-Cola got ratioed for that, and their people just brought up how hey, the guys who funded right-wing death squads in Latin America really shouldn't be weighing in on this issue. And frankly, I would say the same thing to Congress. Congress is even more hypocritical than Coca-Cola, considering that they are currently funding, death squads in various different countries. Not to mention funding all sorts of terrorism overseas in the past. Members of Congress really, and Congress as an institution has no leg to stand on, criticizing these people in any way. But again, that was my topic yesterday. I don't want to get back into that. So as I said, you have people on the left and right increasingly feeling like they must resort to violence to achieve their goals, like the system is not sufficient, the political system is not sufficient for addressing the issues that they see. They feel like voting has not gotten them anywhere. But it is the right side which is being inflamed by the power structure in this country. And because of that, I think that now when the dam has broken, so to speak. I think I've quoted Michael Malice before on this channel as saying that Donald Trump was not the river, he was the dam. Trump was appeasing a lot of these people. By having Trump in Washington, a lot of people feel the same way that a lot of your general Black Lives Matter supporters feel when they hear Adidas or Nike come out and say, oh, golly, cops are bad and Black Lives Matter. It makes them feel heard. It makes them feel like, hey, at least somebody's on my side. When Trump was in Washington, all of these people who support him, they have felt for 4 years like, hey, there's at least one person in this country in a position of power who is standing up for me and is listening to me. And that helped keep them calm. With Trump gone, with Trump out of the way, it's not that these people are necessarily all Trump cultists who, oh my gosh, the orange man is gone. We've lost our purpose in life. No, it's that Trump was appeasing these people. He was keeping a lid on their rage and on their righteous indignation. And so the combination of them constantly being inflamed by the media, by corporate America, and by every other politician in this country not named Donald Trump, these people are going to be whipped up into a frenzy, a perpetual frenzy perhaps, very quickly now that he's gone. And I think that might have been what just started this week. Because again, the people who are clutching their pearls at what happened in Washington are not your rank and file Trump supporters. They're people who didn't like Trump to begin with, or they were ex-never Trumpers who begrudgingly said, okay, well, Trump's a Republican and he gave us tax cuts, so I guess he's okay in my book, but I would have preferred to have Marco Rubio president. And so at this point, I think that the genie is out of the bottle. You could have said maybe that the genie was out of the bottle in 2016, but I think that the conclusion from 2016 is that Trump was able to delay the total the total feeling of disenfranchisement on the right, I guess you could say loosely. And so people really have no patience left anymore. They have, I think, again, storming up to the Capitol like that is a demonstration of how illegitimate you think that those people are. And the left, traditionally, are the ones who are much more open to doing this sort of thing. We just saw it with Kavanaugh, where they stormed into the Senate to protest Kavanaugh being confirmed because he was an evil rapist. But for the right to get this, they have to get up to a much higher temperature for them to lash out in this way. Because the right generally are, they're much more, walk softly, carry a big stick. But it's harder to provoke them into using the stick. So I think we can safely assume at this point that respect for federal authority is at an all-time low. On the right, I think that the left didn't have much respect for them to begin with. Somebody like Joe Biden is not a left-wing hero. The Black Lives Matter movement started under Barack Obama. And so with Trump gone and Biden in, and Biden and Harris totally blowing off, the BLM, even the main, the official BLM movement, I do not see their rioting and protests slowing down anytime soon. And the right, I only see escalating their protests. You're going to see a much more unruly version of the Tea Party probably starting up this year and next year. The thin blue line flags are going to start disappearing from right-wing protests. The martyrdom of this woman who died at the Capitol on Wednesday is going to have a significant effect. And so I think now we are going to start heading down very quickly a path of where political violence becomes quite common until there is something to release the pressure. You cannot just crack down on people at this point. A crackdown is not going to solve anything. That might very well be what Congress tries, a new sort of Patriot Act to clamp down on domestic extremism, let's say. This time, instead of going after making Muslims the boogeyman, you'll make white supremacists the boogeymen. And by white supremacists, they mean anyone who was in favor of Trump. This will only inflame people further. And so the only thing that I think can de-escalate this situation is the decentralization of political authority from Washington down to more localized areas. I mean, I think preferably in a perfect world, or not perfect, but almost as good as you can get, you would have everything decided at your county level. Counties are, small relatively small communities. They can have their own laws and things. and and it's easy enough if, let's say, you're totally politically defeated, and someone with the exact opposite politics of yours that is totally intolerable to you comes to power, you can pick up and move pretty easily somewhere else. That's how Germany roughly worked under the principle of Kleinstaaterei, or sort of small states during the time of the Holy Roman Empire. I think that would be a very preferable alternative to what we're currently doing. That was sort of what the founding fathers originally looked to. The original 13 states, some of them are very small, and they originally were intended to have total authority over their own domestic well-being and laws and such. As the United States has grown to be larger geographically and population-wise, it has also become politically more centralized, with power concentrated in Washington, and this has led to bigger and bigger fights over power in D.C. between competing political interests. And so increasingly the losers feel like they are bigger and bigger losers. This is something that is not, it's not something that can be fixed by just so-called coming together, which is code for you surrender and do whatever I say. This is a structural issue with our political system. And unfortunately, I don't see cooler heads coming forward to institute the proper change, i.e. decentralization, that would be necessary to preserve the stability of the United States. Nobody wants to de-escalate this. Everyone wants to inflame tensions more and more. They think that simply by crushing their enemies harder this time, then we're going to come out a unified people on the other end. But if there is no home for the politically vanquished, well then obviously they're going to resort to violence, as that will be their only recourse. It's truly a sad thing. It's not something that I would ever want to happen, but unfortunately I think that is now the path that we're heading down for the next while. And if you think things are bad now, wait until we go into a full depression, economically speaking. The non-farm payroll report contracted. It showed negative job growth for the first time since May, I think. Hard to say if that already is going to be the start of a trend, but we've been we currently have a Humpty Dumpty economy. Things originally broke down back at the start of the lockdowns, and things have only been preserved on paper. Through the massive government stimulus, on paper, GDP has been only somewhat reduced. I think it's down like 2% in 2020. But if you take down, or if you get rid of the government stimulus that was added in this year, which was all just printed money from the Fed, I think the economy contracted something like 20%. And so there's a lot of pain already being felt, and I'll get into the financial issues later, but once you compound those with the political issues that I've outlined today, it's easy to see that things necessarily will get much worse before they get better. Now, some people think that I'm advocating for this. Obviously, I have like 600 subscribers on YouTube. I'm not in a position to advocate for much of anything, but I certainly would not advocate for this if I had a substantial platform. What I advocate for is peace. All I'm saying is that I'm not getting my way. I'm not in control here. I'm just making observations on what I think will happen, not necessarily what I think should happen. And when I say, when I describe a best-case scenario, that's the best-case scenario based on what, could happen in reality, not the best-case scenario of what my utopia in my head looks like. It's like when I say, oh, the best-case scenario right now to all of this U.S. unrest that I see is certain states, whether they be blue states or red states, getting fed up and saying, hey, we're going to secede and be our own country and make our own rules. And people go, oh, but what if there are Republicans left in the blue states, or what if there are Democrats left in the red states? Wouldn't that be, suboptimal? What about those people? It's like, well, yeah, obviously it's not perfect. It's not like everybody can get everything they want, but it's better than all the people in all the states wanting to kill each other. at least then you'll have different sanctuaries for people of different values, where they'll have an escape to. As it stands, if you're someone in this country and in your eyes the wrong person becomes president, you have nowhere to go. You're stuck. And so obviously, if you were someone in Texas, if I were in Texas, recreating the Republic of Texas would not be utopia to me, but it would be a better alternative to the current state of affairs. If I were a revolutionary communist in California, having California secede along with Oregon and Washington and form Cascadia would not be utopia, but it would be far preferable to being a part of the evil bourgeois capitalist United States. And something else to consider is that your left-right divide within states is not as extreme as the left-right divide nationally. The left-right divide in Wyoming, for example, is far narrower than the left-right divide between Wyoming and New York City. You have the political center has a different spot sort of on the spectrum, if you think about it. Like in Florida, for example, people say, oh my gosh, if Florida was an independent country, I mean, that's those swing states, I mean, that would be just as bad as things are now, because people would be so divided. You swing states, it's like, well, not really, because there's not a Florida Democrat, the kind of person who could win the kind of Democrat who could win a statewide race in Florida is nowhere near politically someone like Andrew Cuomo or a literal communist like Bill de Blasio or a Gavin Newsom or something like that. That just the different states have their own political cultures. So I guess I will close now with some advice on how I personally am going to broach this incoming era in American politics and American life, and how I recommend other people should as well. Not that I'm an authority who necessarily has the best answers, but I think I've thought about this for a long time. Essentially, now that we're getting to this point, I would say you should keep your head down. There's no real gain in engaging in political conversations, unless it's somebody that you know, maybe, and you just want to vent about stuff. But there's no point in debating people. I see no point in trying to change people's minds at this point. I think that what should be done at this point is you should try and ride it out. Don't get crushed by the waves. If you feel like you find somewhere good to jump in, maybe ride the wave yourself for a while, but don't do anything stupid. Don't riot, don't loot. There will be plenty of people doing that sort of thing. Now I think it's time to play the waiting game, to watch what happens, to see how things are unfolding, and try to keep yourself in the mindset of a bystander. You don't want to necessarily let yourself get caught up in the zeitgeist, because that's when you might get yourself into a risky situation. So this has been a long one today, and I will continue to develop these ideas moving forward. Obviously, this is not a brand new sort of line of thinking for me. I think that the events of Wednesday are in line with what I've been expecting for some time. Obviously, I didn't expect that in particular, but it wasn't shocking to me. So for now, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see folks back here tomorrow.